Hello and welcome to a tactical history of Liverpool. The last time we left Liverpool in the league, they had just lost their first match of the season. Now nearly 4 months later, they had lost a further 4 and drawn 4-2, sitting in 6th place. They were once again struggling to score goals, and in a bid to rectify this, Bill Shankly had already tried 10 different combinations of strike partnerships in attack. Injuries to Kevin Keegan and Larry Lloyd hadn't exactly helped with their slow start either. Their opponents for today's game were Brian Clough's Derby County. Clough had been a prolific goalscorer for hometown club Middlesbrough in the 2nd Division, and this individual success did little to deflate his ego. When called up for England despite being a 2nd Division player, Clough refused to adapt his game for his more illustrious teammates, reasoning that it was in the middle where he scored, so that's where he should stay, and suggesting that Jimmy Greaves or Bobby Charlton should be dropped.
Said, "Are you happy?" And I said, "Well, I'm not really happy." I said, "Because I want to know who's going to give me the ball. Because Greaves is not going to give me it. Charlton can't give me it, because Bobby used to score this from 25 yards. He was a goal scorer. And we went to Cardiff and played there in Ninian Park, I think it was, and we drew 1-1, and I never got a kick."
It is perhaps little surprise then that he won only 2 caps. Clough also frequently publicly criticised his Middlesbrough teammates, and most of those teammates couldn't stand him due to his arrogance, circulating petitions to strip him of the club captaincy.
We went at Charlton once. We were beaten 6-3, because I got 3. I got the 3. And coming back on the train or bus, wherever it was, I said, if we score 5 next week, do you think we'll get a point? And that type of thing didn't go down too well with centre-halves.
He put in transfer requests for years before the club finally gave in and accepted in 1961. With Shankly looking for a striker at the time, he was very keen on signing Clough. However, Liverpool's board would only make an offer far below Middlesbrough's asking price. Clough instead stayed in the North East, moving to Sunderland, and Shankly was once again left asking why he was even bothering. Had Liverpool put up the cash, they may well have saved themselves a headache in the long run. A year after signing for Sunderland, on a windy and icy Boxing Day match, Clough collided with the opposition goalkeeper, tearing the medial and cruciate ligaments in his knee. He was out for 2 years as he attempted to recover. During his absence, Sunderland had gotten promoted. However, Clough was a 1st Division player for only 3 games before being forced into retirement.
And I trained for 18 months, and I managed to get back onto a football field. It was just that I didn't get back as well as I left it.
Suddenly I had nothing but worry, said Clough. I was finished, an ex-footballer who knew how to do nothing other than play football. After his injury, Clough became bitter, lashing out at everyone at Sunderland. His teammates had previously largely tolerated his abrasiveness as, on bonus-heavy contracts, Clough's goals could potentially triple their wages. Now though, he was souring the atmosphere at a club already fighting relegation. He could hardly be blamed for his foul mood though. His livelihood had been taken from him, he had no qualifications to do anything else, and he now had a family to support, his first son having been born that summer. To stop him moping, Clough was given a job coaching Sunderland's youngsters. The Sunderland youth side had responded to me immediately, he said, because I scrubbed those dreadful monotonous laps from the training routine. I put a ball down and we played football, 5-a-side, 6-a-side, anything that enabled them to practice the way they were expected to play as a team. I adored that part of my life despite the shattering blow that had ended my playing career. I discovered a new challenge, and my liking for management, such as it was at that modest level, was immediate. He had picked up a lot from his former manager Alan Brown. He was a stickler for discipline, said Clough. That was the side I got from Alan Brown. Alan Brown was not simply my manager, he was my mentor. Clough didn't last long at Sunderland though. According to former teammate Norman Clark, his contract was up and it wasn't renewed because he'd annoyed too many people. He was an insufferable bloke. The press liked Clough though, because he talked a lot. He also had fingers in many pies and was friends with a few powerful people, notably Jackie Milburn and Len Shackleton. They managed to concoct the job at Hartlepool for Clough by speaking to their chairman Ernest Ord. Hartlepool's manager at the time, Jeff Twentyman, had been in charge for only 3 months when he was jettisoned for Clough. My mother was pregnant with me, said William Twentyman, Jeff's son. We had nowhere to live. Brian Clough wanted to move into our house in Hartlepool and have my mum and dad turfed out before the end of a month's notice. My mum hated Clough for that. She resented him for the rest of her life and wouldn't hear a good word said about him. This was the other side of Liverpool's sliding doors moment in the summer of 1961. Had they paid the money to sign Clough, maybe he doesn't get injured and go into management so soon. But, in that case, maybe Twentyman doesn't end up scouting for Liverpool and signing the players that see them dominate for 2 decades. It was at Hartlepool's that Clough would link up with former Middlesbrough teammate Peter Taylor. Taylor was manager of Burton Albion at the time, however out of the blue he received a call from Clough, having not spoken to him in 4 years, offering Taylor a role alongside him. Against the advice of his friends and family, and despite it meaning a wage cut, Taylor took him up on the offer. Taylor had already demonstrated his ability to spot players at Burton. He rebuilt the side, signing strikers Richie Barker and Stan Round, who remain to this day the club's all-time leading goal scorers, and won the Southern League Cup. You may ask why a manager of a successful non-league club joins a struggling league side as assistant manager, Taylor told the local paper as he arrived. The answer is that I want success, and I know that under Brian Clough we will achieve that success. I know that together we can, and will, make something of a challenge here.
We thought right from the beginning, from our early days at Hartlepool when we first started management, that together we could have success quicker together than we could individually.
It's little surprise that Taylor was the first person Clough thought of when in need of someone to help him spot players, as it was Taylor who first saw Clough's potential at Middlesbrough. According to Clough, the first words Taylor had said to him were, "I don't know what's going on at this club. You are better than anybody here." The pair soon became close friends talking football.
Brian, he used to come and knock on the door at Middlesbrough, and he used to say, "Is Pete in?" And I said, "Yes, come on in, Brian." And he'd come in and they'd be talking football all night.
His judgment of a player was a vital ingredient of our management days together, said Clough. I thought I could recognise a player when I saw one, but I wasn't a patch on him.
Peter initially was the best finder of players in the business. He could go to a match and he could look, and I'd be running the club, and Peter'd come back and I'd see him on a Monday and he'd say, "He can't play at all." Or he'd come back and say, "He's got half a chance, I better have another look at him." And we signed players like that, and we dealt with what we'd got.
Maurice Edwards, chief scout for Clough and Taylor across several clubs, outlined the checklist Taylor had when looking at players. How well does he receive the ball, from any height, first touch and to control it? What does he do with it? Is he aware of players, both his own and opponents, around him? How comfortable is he when moving with the ball? Does he use both feet? If a forward, how well does he strike the ball? Has he got pace? Is he able to use both feet? As a defender, how good are his clearances? What length does he achieve? Can he move forward with purpose, keeping full control of the ball? What is his heading ability? How high does he jump when heading? What are his stamina and mobility like? If a player fulfilled a lot of this criteria, Peter knew he was a serious prospect. Taylor had little opportunity to show off his ability at Hartlepool's though, as they had little money available to improve the squad. "We spent more on disinfectant than on players," claimed Taylor. Clough had to tour local pubs for donations just to keep the club afloat, and apply for a coach driver's licence to drive a team bus himself. Taylor had to talk Clough out of resigning several times, reasoning that should they walk out on their first job in management, they may be unable to find another. A year after their arrival, Ord sacked Taylor, and Clough's refusal to accept it saw him dismissed too. However, the rest of the board refused to ratify the sackings, instead ousting Ord as chairman. Ord was, according to Clough, one of the most evil men I have ever met. Having sold the drapery business that made him his fortune, Ord had turned all his attention to Hartlepool's, and those who worked for the club suffered for it. He would belittle employees and interrogate players at length in his office, secretly recording them. Ord's constant interference hampered Clough's ability to do his job, so the coup must have come as a relief. Beating Ord was equal to winning the European Cup, Clough claimed. Hartlepool's would finish the season in a respectable 8th place, yet, having won the war against Ord, Clough set his eyes on promotion. Taylor remained less convinced though. Even without Ord getting in their way, Hartlepool's had no money, giving them little leeway to improve the squad. Taylor didn't have the same attachment to the North East as Clough did either, and so he was much keener to move on, asking their friend Shackleton to find them another club. Derby County had had some success in the immediate post-war era, winning the FA Cup in 1946, but 7 years later they were relegated to the 2nd Division, and they soon slipped down further into the 3rd.
Immediately after the war we had great players, Raish Carter, Peter Doherty, Billy Steele, Liam Luty, Jack Howe, and they practically all left within 2 or 3 years, and of course the youngsters weren't coming along then, and the club, probably thought, well, we'll make do and mend. You never make do and mend.
They won promotion back to the 2nd Division in 1957, but over the next decade they were generally closer to the bottom of the table than a return to the 1st Division.
We were a very, very good side when we had the ball, and we weren't too good when the other side had it, and probably I was one of those players. I think that it was in later years that people sort of paid the importance, or just let me know that I was supposed to play as well when the other team had it.
There is potential in Derby for a great team, but under the present setup I see no chance of improvement, said manager Tim Ward. Indeed, had I known what I know now, I would not have taken the job. The job has been the toughest I have ever had, and the shortage of money has been frustrating. The trouble with this club is that you can't put a 3-penny stamp on a letter without consulting the board personally. I was told that money was available, but I could never get an answer when I asked how much. Despite the lack of funds, Ward had managed to sign the likes of Kevin Hector, Colin Bolton, Alan Durbin, Peter Daniel and Ron Webster, who would all prove to be important in the coming years. Yet Chairman Sam Longson considered Ward too much of a gentleman to be successful. He decided not to renew Ward's contract, while also letting go of trainer Ralph Hann and chief scout Sam Crooks. With Derby on the hunt for a new manager, Shackleton mentioned Clough's name to Longson, and the chairman became obsessed with the idea. The other board members were less impressed with a manager who had ultimately achieved little in the 4th Division, especially when they found out he wanted to bring along Taylor too. However, having just sold his haulage business, Longston offered both main contracts, and was willing to make £70,000 available for transfers. Their predecessor had been promised money too though, and that never materialised, so to ensure the board stayed honest, Clough began to hint to the press that signings were imminent. Clough had been a master media manipulator since his playing days, where his tendency to run his mouth made him good copy for journalists in comparison to his peers. Clough had them essentially write propaganda for him in his campaign to play for England. Criticism would see him stop talking to them. I quickly learned how to use the media, he admitted. It didn't take long for signings to arrive. John O'Hare was first. The teenager had played under Clough at Sunderland and was brought in to partner Hector up front. Next was Roy McFarlane from Tranmere Rovers, who Taylor had already earmarked money for. He was almost top of my reasons for being so keen to join Derby and spend their £70,000, said Taylor. I knew that the moment we had money to spend, my target would be Tranmere's centre-half. With plenty of other clubs sniffing around the defender, Clough and Taylor turned up at his house after midnight to get him to sign.
So this is Saturday morning, 1 o'clock in the morning. I've come down and I've got my best pyjamas on. And when I come into my lounge, the first thing my mother says, Brian, Peter, Dave Russell, Dave, would you like a cup of tea? Yes, they had a cup of tea. So I sat down and they explained everything to me. Dave Russell said, Roy, Derby County want to sign you. We've agreed a fee. If you want to sign for them, they've got the forms, you need to sign them. If you don't, I'll see you on Monday morning for training. And Dave Russell left the house. So I've now got Brian Clough and Peter Taylor. My mother comes in again. Brian, would you like another pot of tea? Love another cup of tea, Mrs. McFarlane. So this went on for about an hour and a half. So we're nearly into, we're not at 3 o'clock yet, but we're getting close to 3 o'clock in the morning. And I just don't want to make a decision. There's only one club I want to play for, and that's Liverpool Football Club. I'm a Shankly man. Liverpool was my team. Everton was my father's team, so we had a split in the family, and all I wanted to do was play for Liverpool Football Club, and all I wanted to do was play for Bill Shankly. But these two men wouldn't give in. And I wouldn't give in as well, because I said, Mr. Clough, I want to stay. I want to think about it over the weekend, and then I'll give you my answer on Monday. I think they must have known by my reaction that my reaction on Monday was already made up. I didn't want to sign for Derby County Football Club. They asked me again, come on Roy, let's get something sorted out. We're not leaving this house till you make a decision tonight. And it better be the right decision. That's the way Brian was. I turned around to my father and I said, Dad, what do you think? He said, if they want you that badly, son, I think you should sign. By me saying that, Peter Taylor, Brian Clough were off out of the seat. They were out to me, and Peter Taylor put the forms in front of me, and I kid you not, there's the forms. And the first thing Peter Taylor said to me, listen to your father, listen to what he said, and sign these forms. And I sat there in my best pyjamas thinking, no, I'm not going to sign them. Peter Taylor put a pen in my hand, he said, listen to your father, he said, sign those forms. And I kid you not, I've got the pen in my hand and Peter Taylor's signing whatever it's signed. And he won't let go. So that's one form, then the next form came up. The next form, they moved them on, the next form, so and so, so and so. The minute those forms were signed, both of them said, right, we'll see you Monday morning. Get down to, we had a game on Monday evening. He said, get down for around about midday. He said, bring your mother and father with you, and we're off back to Derby, because they played at home that Saturday. So that was it. I'd committed it, I'd signed, and I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And I went to watch Liverpool on Saturday, because that was my team. They were playing Newcastle United. Tony Haley was making his debut for Liverpool. He scored a hat-trick and Liverpool won 5-0. And I'm standing on the cop, and I turned around to my cousin, who'd been with me the night before. I said, I've made the biggest, excuse my language, cock-up I've ever done in my life. I don't know what I've done. John, I can't believe it. And the sad thing is, I can't get out of it. But in truth, it was the best decision I ever made in my life.
McFarlane was the best signing of my career, said Taylor. They also added former England international Alan Hinton. The winger had a reputation for avoiding physical confrontation, and so Nottingham Forest thought they had done well offloading him to their rivals.
Alan Hinton was petrified.
Yeah.
And I used to say to him, you're bloody petrified. And he says, yeah. So I surrounded him with people who weren't petrified. And they made up for what he hadn't got.
Yeah.
And he made up what they hadn't got, because he could plonk a ball with either foot anywhere.
Yeah.
But he couldn't go and get it himself, so I had to get somebody to get it for him, and then you go and plonk it, like, you know.
We weren't the losers in that transfer, said Taylor. Only £29,000 for the best crosser with both feet I've ever seen. As well as making additions to the squad, Clough and Taylor trimmed some fat to help balance the books too. I think the casualties at the end of our first season totaled 16 players, 4 groundsmen, some caterers, a couple of clerks, and a tea lady who laughed after a bad defeat, recalled Taylor. Derby started the 67-68 season brilliantly, winning 7 of their opening 9 matches. However, it wouldn't last. They managed just 6 more wins over the entire rest of the season, finishing in 18th place, 1 place lower than their last season under Ward. Clough now believed goalkeeper Reg Matthews to be past his best, so, just as he had at Hartlepool's, he signed Taylor's old keeper at Burton, Les Green. This was a surprise, as Green and Clough had fallen out. Green had broken his thumb and collarbone playing for Hartlepool's away at Aldershot and had bravely played on, only for Clough to deny anything was wrong with him, forcing him to return to the hospital and have his bandages removed. He then forced Green to train until doctors confirmed he couldn't, and then refused to talk to him while he was out. Green's contract was later cancelled for undisclosed breaches of discipline. It's likely only because of Green's respect for Taylor that he joined Derby. Talking to Pete about football was like talking to Einstein about science, he said. They added another of their former charges from Hartlepool's, John McGovern, to the midfield.
When he was bought from Hartlepool at Derby, one director said to me, what have you brought us? A splather-footed, innocuous, frail, weakling and all that type of thing, which as opposed to the unlearned eye, that's exactly what he was.
As well as the tenacious Willie Carlin. They had tried to sign him the season prior, only to be thwarted as Clough's predecessor, Ward, had taken over at Carlisle. Ward refused to let them speak to Carlin, and he instead moved to Sheffield United. However, after a difficult year in Yorkshire, Derby came back in for him again, and this time they got their man. Their biggest signing was without doubt the legendary Dave Mackay, though. Mackay was one of the greatest Scottish players of all time, but he was now 33, older than Clough, and had suffered 2 leg breaks. After nearly a decade at Tottenham, he was planning on returning to boyhood club Hearts, but in need of more experience in his side, Clough raced down to London to talk Mackay into signing for Derby instead. His effort paid off. I hadn't just signed a player, I'd recruited a kind of institution, said Clough. I never made a more effective signing in my entire managerial career.
Dave was the best. The cornerstone is a underestimation of David Mackay's influence at Derby County. He was the Derby County. Dave was a competitor at every level and lost his temper when he lost and lost his temper with his colleagues. But they were all impressionable young men, as I was, and we were all standing back in awe of David. And not only was he playing and winning matches and championships for us, he didn't know, but he was doing my job as well. But I soon twigged he was doing my job, so I was very grateful.
He was signed to play alongside McFarland in defence, the same role we saw him play for Spurs in episode 9, seeing Derby shift to a back 4.
The best signing I think that Derby ever made was the start of the following season, and that's when they signed Dave Mackay from Tottenham Hotspur. What a player. What a player. The best player probably that I played with. A guy who was 34, could pass the ball better than anybody, could pass the ball better than Bobby Moore, could tackle certainly better than Bobby Moore, and led Tottenham to the double. Played for Scotland and captained Scotland. An incredible player who led us, the team absolutely admired him. We followed him and he led us along the path. And eventually we got promoted, obviously, into the old First Division.
Derby's fortunes this season would be an inversion of the last. They failed to win any of their opening 5 matches, but would then clamber up the table, going top just before Christmas and winning all of their final 9 games to finish 7 points clear. Clough had barely been a First Division player, yet now he was a First Division manager. Showing his appreciation for their work, Longston handed Clough and Taylor raises that meant their wages were now double that of the Archbishop of Canterbury. When a reporter pointed this out to Clough, the manager reasoned that the baseball ground is full on Saturday, but on Sunday the churches were almost empty. Despite the step up in competition, Clough showed trust in his squad. The sole addition was to his backroom staff, bringing in trainer Jimmy Gordon from Middlesbrough. Having done little other than argue with Clough the player, Gordon wasn't initially keen on the move. I didn't like him, neither was I a fan of Peter Taylor, he said. £1,000 payment for a deposit on a house was enough to convince him though. Derby kicked off their campaign extraordinarily well, topping the league as they went their first 11 matches unbeaten. They were first taste defeat at the end of September though, and they would struggle to maintain consistency through the winter, losing a game for every one they won. The signing of Terry Hennessy gave them a boost for the run-in, going the final 12 matches of the season unbeaten to finish 4th. It should have seen them qualify for Europe for the first time in their history, but dodgy bookkeeping saw them banned.
Well, to be honest, it was a mess. It wasn't a mess through criminality, it was a mess through neglect. People didn't understand what they should have been doing. The people who were running the club were under Brian's sort of magical spell, and there was nobody who understood how football should be run.
It appeared that the club was simply moving too fast for the administration to keep up, which couldn't have been helped by a warring boardroom. Longson had been forced out of his role as chairman, but by the end of the season he had won it back, as a string of other directors resigned. This was one of the most successful periods in the club's history on the pitch, but Derby were a mess off it. Clough brought in Preston secretary Stuart Webb to help with administration, however doing so wasn't within the purview of the manager. Clough got around this by appointing Webb while Longson was on holiday. Even Longson, at this point still infatuated with Clough, was tiring of him overstepping his mark. I had to work overtime to explain to him that a football club is a limited company subject to company law, he said. It's also subject to the rules and regulations of the Football Association and the Football League. Brian had a free hand in running most aspects of the club, and it was becoming increasingly apparent to me that the time had come to separate the duties of team management and general administration.
Not only a free hand in the as far as the manager's job as football, a free hand as far as the whole setup at the baseball ground.
This transgression didn't even particularly benefit Clough, as Webb neither liked nor trusted him, and Clough later attempted to have him sacked.
Brian thought that I was part of the board. He felt that I was sitting with the board as the company secretary, general manager, whatever. I was part of that scene. He should have done.
Although Webb's idea of selling 2-year season tickets did give Clough and Taylor more money to play with. Derby's 70-71 season would follow a similar pattern to the previous one, but worse. After losing their opener against Chelsea, the Rams won 3 on the trot, however they would follow this up by winning just 3 of their next 20 matches. They will then win their next 5 matches in a row, only to then win just 1 of their next 7, losing 5, before rebounding to go unbeaten in their last 6 games. They would finish 9th. It hadn't been a great season for Derby on the pitch, but it was worse still off it. Taylor had suffered a suspected heart attack on an away trip to Arsenal in October, and would continue working for another 2 months before being made to rest, only returning towards the end of the season. When Derby first started to stutter, Clough and Taylor had made moves to bolster their midfield, signing Archie Gemmell from Preston.
I never saw Archie Gemmell play. I'm in Taylor's car, and I said to Taylor, he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going home for my tea, like, you know, about 5:30, I get in the shower." He said, "You're not going anywhere." He said, "You're going to Preston. You're signing Gemmell." Gemmell said, "I'll sign for you at 8 o'clock in the morning." I'd been at his house all day, and his missus was out here with young Scott. And I said, "Why 8 o'clock in the morning?" He said, 8, and he was a little shit, Gemmell, he is now. But he was stubborn, and he said 8 o'clock. I said, "Well, if you think I'm going back to Derby and then coming back here to sign you," I said, "you're not even good enough," which I knew he was good enough, but I didn't want him to know, I knew. So I said, "Well," "I'll stay here the night." He said, "Where?" I said, "Here, in your house." I said, "Get a cushion on the settee." Well, his missus gets upstairs, makes a spare bed up for me. Comes down, she's got my bloody breakfast ready. He comes down, bloody dressing gown on, and I've got the phones ready. I'd had my breakfast. He comes down about 6:30. I said, "You're late." I said, "Next time you're late, you're fined." I said, "Sign them." And he signed them.
And then in February, with Mackay ageing and McFarlane and Hennessy picking up injuries, Clough, for once making his own judgments with Taylor away, signed another of his former players, Colin Todd from Sunderland, for £175,000, a British record fee for a defender. Clough had denied the links, stating, "We're not signing Colin Todd, we can't afford him," only to sign him that same day. Taylor privately told Edwards he wouldn't have signed Todd himself, referring to him as a bread and butter player, although Edwards suggested this was because Brian had signed Colin and there was a little jealousy involved. Taylor was no doubt an excellent judge of a player, so it made sense to defer to his expertise, yet he could also be deeply insecure and reacted badly when others intruded upon his area of control. For example, Edwards' predecessor as chief scout, George Pycroft, was officially sacked for watching Derby matches when he should have been out scouting for new players, yet Pycroft suspected he had really been let go for embarrassing Taylor. He had spotted Kevin Keegan at Scunthorpe and recommended Derby do anything necessary to sign him. But when Taylor went to have a look himself, he came away unimpressed. Seeing how Keegan turned out at Liverpool was a considerable blow to Taylor's ego, so he didn't appreciate being ribbed by Pycroft about it. Longson had agreed to the Todd signing, but not to the massive fee, and only found out about his arrival via telegram, as once again Clough had added to the staff while the chairman was on holiday. I was bitterly disappointed that Brian had taken on both Stuart Webb and now Colin Todd without discussing finance, he said. I felt the incidents destroyed something between Brian and myself, a sort of unspoken trust. I don't think the relationship between us, once seemingly untarnishable, was ever quite the same again. I didn't feel the need to even consult the chairman or directors before doing our business, recalled Clough. The way I saw it was simple. I was the manager, the man in charge. A lesson he had taken from his main managerial influences, Alan Brown and Harry Storer, was that he had to accept responsibility for everything at the club. You must establish your territory, Clough advises managers in his book. However, he was making it clear at Derby that he considered everywhere his territory. Derby started this season much better, going their first 12 matches unbeaten, albeit 7 of them were draws. League leaders Manchester United handed them their first defeat, but they followed it up with 3 wins. In the run-up to this match though, they had fallen into a pattern of losing a match for every one they won. That Derby had beaten Manchester City the previous week was a good sign for Liverpool. The only man missing from Derby's usual lineup was left-back John Robson. This would be the sole match Robson would miss all season, although whether this was due to him being unfit or because Mike Summerby had given him a runaround in his last outing is unclear. Terry Hennessy filled in his absence, coming in at centre-back as Ron Webster swapped out to the left and Colin Todd was moved to right-back. Bill Shankly made 3 changes to the starting 11 we saw in episode 33. Alec Lindsay returned at left-back, with Ian Ross moving inside to fill in for the injured Lloyd at centre-back. Brian Hall replaced Bobby Graham on the right flank, and Jack Whitham came in for Alan Evans up front. Despite signing for Liverpool in April 1970, this is the first time Whitham has been mentioned in the series. The striker simply hadn't featured much since his arrival. He was always getting injured, recalled Ian St John. Training for Jack was like jogging in between injuries. He was driving Shanks mad because he hated people who were like that.
I'm guessing that every ex-Liverpool player you interview will tell you the same about Shanks. He just hated injured players.
Yeah.
All he wanted to concentrate on were, I can understand it, those who were fit, those who could play in the team in the next game. And because he used to go around telling people he'd never been injured, nobody ever hurt him, he couldn't be hurt and stuff like this. Don't know whether that was ever true or not, but you'll have heard the stories about Shanks.
Yeah.
I mean, the Saint thought it was really funny because after my ruptured knee ligaments, Shanks made me train on my own because he said it could be catching, the injury could be catching. And listen, all these years later, that sounds funny, doesn't it? But you know when it happens to you at the time, it's heartbreaking, it's not funny.
Shankly could hardly say he wasn't warm though. Whitham had maintained an impressive scoring record of a goal every other game for a struggling Sheffield Wednesday side, but he had never managed 20 league appearances in a season, forever sidelined by injuries. That Whitham was signed despite this showed quite how desperate Liverpool were to replace Roger Hunt. Shankly had also looked into signing Peter Osgood and Frank Worthington in this period, who were undoubtedly talented players, yet they were very much individualists who enjoyed a playboy lifestyle off the field. Worthington's transfer to Liverpool famously fell through. He showed high blood pressure at his medical, so went on holiday to Mallorca to settle down, only to report back with even higher blood pressure, having, how shall we say, enjoyed the local sights. It's hard to see Shankly, who frequently disparaged the London clubs for being soft and spending all their money in nightclubs, tolerating such behaviour. Whether it was Whitham's injuries or Worthington and Osgood's lifestyles, Shankly was showing himself willing to overlook certain shortcomings if it just meant he could get some goals. Liverpool didn't need to sign some flash cockneys if they wanted to see the latest fashions though, as in this game, Captain Tommy Smith took to the field sporting white boots. Hummel had originally offered Kevin Keegan a considerable sum to wear them, but the youngster was unsure and asked Smith for his advice. "They're not for you," he said, pointing out that all the other players asked wore white socks, whereas Liverpool wore red. "You're going to look a right prat if you're not careful." Smith also pointed out that if Keegan continued doing the business for Liverpool, then he would have plenty of other boot manufacturers fighting over him. It wasn't what Keegan wanted to hear, but he respected his captain's opinion and turned down the deal. Imagine his shock when he turned up for their next game then. "I looked over at Tommy and did a double take," he recalled. "I had to laugh at his sheer nerve. It did make me feel slightly better though, but he was very self-conscious in those white boots. He even started dabbing on streaks of red boot polish to stop them dazzling quite so brightly under the floodlights. Tommy being Tommy, that just started a rumour that it was the blood of his opponents." With Alan Hinton and Colin Todd each wearing a pair too, Derby weren't sure of fashionistas either, and they started the match playing some nice football. John McGovern quickly controlled the ball and moved it on, Archie Gemmill was willing to carry it forward, and much as Liverpool did with Hall, Alan Durban came off a flank into midfield. On top of this, Kevin Hector was roaming, dropping off the front line, or moving wide, while Hinton was sometimes tucked inside too. As Hall was often tracking back out wide, or helping out the midfield, Webster was also left free at left back. The result was that Derby weren't short of options to progress the ball, passing it forward nicely. Liverpool on the other hand were playing more directly, looking to quickly get in behind Derby. It was Liverpool's approach that would soon be rewarded. Hall intercepted a pass by Webster, catching the left back upfield, and immediately looped a pass in behind. With Rory McFarlane pulling wide to pick up Steve Highway, covering for Webster, Whitham was left alone with Hennessy through the middle, getting to the ball first. Colin Bolton rushed out to meet him, but he failed to smother the ball, deflecting it up into the air for Whitham to nod into the empty net. Liverpool would nearly double their lead soon after, catching Derby on the counter. Smith played a 1-2 with Highway, breaking forward into the box, and his shot looped over Bolton, barely avoiding the far post. Derby were continuing to advance with their passing, getting the ball deep into the Liverpool half. However, then pushing forward was giving Liverpool more space to attack behind them, and the Reds grew in confidence as the half went on. Ian Callaghan in particular was having an excellent game, showing energy in defence, but then being forward thinking when he had the ball, looking to play good solid passes forward quickly. It was Derby that would get the next goal though, equalising at a corner. Hennessy beat Smith in the air, and with Emlyn Hughes getting drawn towards McFarland, Hector was left free to fire it back inside, with John O'Hare finishing. Liverpool would retake the lead minutes later though. Derby were again passing through the midfield, however Ross intercepted the ball and played it onto Callaghan. The Scouser knocked it forward for Whitham, who controlled the ball with his chest while overpowering Hennessy, then finished past the keeper before McFarlane could get back to help out. Derby will get another equaliser shortly after the break, once again from a corner. McFarlane rose above Hughes to head it at goal, and Ray Clements only managed to tip it onto the crossbar, rebounding back for O'Hare to head it into the net practically on the goal line. Liverpool were by far the stronger team in the second half though. They were often winning with second balls in midfield, allowing them to quickly break at the Derby defence, or to continue to keep up the pressure when they were on the attack. Liverpool were also pressing Derby high up the pitch, making it harder for them to pass out, and even when Derby did manage to get the ball forward, Liverpool were quickly surrounding their attackers to win it back. With Durban tucking into midfield, Lindsay was left with no winger to mark, and so he often came into the middle to help his centre-backs instead, providing them with cover. When Hector drifted wide to exploit the gap, Ross looked comfortable following him to ensure he couldn't. Liverpool would soon retake the lead. They repelled a Derby cross, passing out to Hall, and he hit a long pass in behind for Keegan. Webster and McFarlane were drawn towards him, so he nodded it into space, using McFarlane's momentum against him, before spreading it wide for Highway. The winger shaped as if to come inside on his right, then swung his hips round to hit the byline, beating Todd and drawing in McFarland and Hennessy, before squaring it for Whitham to get his hat-trick. This time there would be no equaliser. Liverpool were happy to run down the clock, but even when they weren't, they looked the likelier team to add to the scoring, breaking forward quickly at Derby. The match was an excellent demonstration of how Liverpool had changed. The 60-sided attack much as Derby did, working the ball forward with short passes, but now Liverpool were much more direct, getting Highway and Keegan flying with quick passes in behind, and intensely pressuring the opposition to get the ball back. The win would see Liverpool rise to 5th, level on points with Derby, extending their unbeaten run at Anfield in the league to 33 matches. It was quite the introduction to the series for Jack Whitham, but Ian Ross also quietly put in an excellent performance in what will be his final appearance. The Glaswegian signed for Liverpool as a teenager in 1965, choosing the Reds despite having had trials at Arsenal and Chelsea, because they put him up with a family rather than having him stay at a hotel as the London clubs had. Captain for the reserves, Ross was used largely as a utility player for the first team, making the odd appearance here and there when a gap in the side opened up. His finest moment in a red shirt would come in the 70-71 season, marking Franz Beckenbauer out of the game and getting the only goal as Liverpool knocked Bayern Munich out of the Intercities Fairs Cup. I went off thinking, I've done my job, he recalled. I've scored and Beckenbauer's hardly taken part. It was only in the 71-72 season that Ross could really be called a regular though, filling in at various positions in defence and midfield. He had developed not just into a savvy defender, but also a calm figure in possession, capable of holding onto the ball under pressure. Having finally established himself in the first team, when he found himself dropped again, he asked to leave the club. Shankly tried to convince Ross to stay, but he had ambitions of playing more first team football. I looked ahead to what faced me at Anfield, and could see nothing but the pattern of reserve team football, with the odd league game when somebody was injured, he said. Ross would move to 3rd Division Aston Villa in February, with Shankly saying, to see Ross go was losing a good friend. Decisions about honest boys like Ross are terribly difficult. Ross is a player's player, a team's player, not always looking for kudos for himself. I wish Ross nothing but the very best of luck. Villa would be promoted to the 2nd Division that season, and they would go on to win the League Cup and promotion to the 1st Division, with Ross as their captain. Because of my years with Liverpool, I was always considered the man with the most experience in the Villa side, he said. The truth is, most of them had played more first team football than me. The difference was that I had been given the best football education available. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to support the channel. This will help show my work to more people and ensure that you see future videos. You can also help me out by sharing this video with people you think would like it. You can keep up with what I'm working on by following on social media, links are in the description, but most importantly by supporting Holding Midfield on Patreon. Without financial support, these videos will simply cease to exist, as they just require too much time and effort. So if you enjoy these videos and would like to see more of them, please consider helping me out financially, and in return you'll get access to exclusive content, as well as early access to those that appear on YouTube. Thanks for watching.